Hey guys, Stealth here, and welcome back to Wargame. I hope my voice is going to hold out for the whole video. If it's going to go down the drain halfway, then, well, I might speed up the replay and try to cover it all. Let's see. Anyway, Wargame, Plunging Valley, 2 versus 2, and we're playing Ash and Shadows. Now, I'm just driving the Canadian deck, and this is the, what am I running, 2.395 I think, so I'm slightly behind the current build. Reason for that is that this replay is slightly older, and if I update, the replays won't work anymore. Anyway, Canadians, I'm going to be spreading, as they say in Far Cry 5, some political correctness all over the place. And we have quite a few new units to do that with. The one that, for example, you might not recognize here is the Kodiak. I'm going to be quickly going over some of the stats of these units, but of course later on an in-depth review of all of these new units will follow in the armory review. I'm playing with Jack, who's the guy who handed me my ass previously. He's going in with a US deck, and as you can see, starting out with a super heavy, the M1A2. Although I'm not exactly sure if this is the 170 point version. I think it is. The CEV, a couple of LVTP-7A1s, probably filled with Marines, and again, I'm going to have to just, well, pretty much guess what's in these transports. As normally an LVTP-7A1 carries Marines or small troops. In this mod it could be anything else. Anyway, Jack here is going to head over to the left flank. He's going to secure Alpha and Delta to some extent. I'm going to be operating on the other hand. So this is Foxtrot. I want to capture this area quickly. That's why I have these helicopters. A couple of 146 Griffins as well as a 147. These guys should be able to get there fast, and hopefully before the enemy gets there. I'm going to be holding this zone with the command infantry, Coyote Recon for security there. This is pretty much the cheapest autocannon vehicle that I had in my deck. I still need to look at it, I still need to change that a bit. And the Coyote over here does do the job, but of course if infantry comes through here, it's not really going to have a lot of shots at the enemy. And that's why I would prefer to have some cheaper autocannon vehicles in this deck to just secure this position. Anyway, let's speed things up, move up to deployment, and start up the battle. Jack, by the way, is also sitting on some Darkhawks. Here we go. Now, the Griffins that you see here, don't mind the unit model too much. 260 kph helos, armed with a 12.7mm kinetic machine gun. I suppose this is a heavy machine gun or maybe a light autocannon, but look at that rate of fire. 2,580 rounds a minute. That's the stuff that you really want to be firing at infantry. Of course, I'm immediately getting countered here by Altruil. The other players, by the way, are Altruil and Big Think. Big Think is a major, so I thought, this is going to be interesting, his tag. Fortunately, I'm playing against Altruil on my flank, and my Eric's troops, just offloaded from the Griffins, arrived just in time with the JTF-2. And again, quick info, JTF-2, pretty much special forces, FN Mag, Carl Gustav M4, not the M3, the M4 does more damage, as well as have, I think, slightly upgraded range as opposed to what it had previous. And these guys have the heavy tag, so they're slightly more survivable. Eric's haven't been changed that much that I could tell. Very good accuracy, very good AP, and they do HE damage. And that's exactly why I wanted them on the front line, because they can take out enemy infantry as well as transports, and hopefully hit the transports so damn hard that the infantry goes down as well. Anyway, my first line has arrived, but there's not a whole lot left of it, so with a couple of bombings, the Eric's just get reduced to 1. Fortunately, I was able to take out some of their transports, and as such you can see that there's not too much of their first line left. But here comes the second wave. Another group of transport comes in. And hopefully my Vickers Mark 7, which is another new tank, do help out here on this flank. These things have a 120mm gun. Good rate of fire, 8 rounds a minute. Come with a trophy APS. There's a couple of smoke dischargers on it. And at this range, they don't really have to fear anything from the Motostrelki over here. On the other flank, I have a couple of defenses. I have an Iltis Scout, exceptional optics, recon jeep. A couple of Pathfinders that are really not in a good position where they are at the moment. And thanks to the Kodiaks over here, a couple of pretty heavily armored, very mobile transports, 6 armor on a wheeled vehicle, offloading Canadian airborne troops. Heavy tag, so they're going to be much more survivable against the Mostrelki. And in the meanwhile, the Vickers are still providing close-up fire support, but they were getting so close that I was getting a bit concerned about the RPG-28 that the Mostrelki carry. But just note that these guys are in a building, these are not. These have the heavy tag, these don't. So far, the Mostrelki have been firing quite a lot at the Canadian airborne, but they haven't taken a single loss. Or at least, not numbers-wise, but if you look at the units bottom left, you can see that they're both on 9 out of 10. As I'm pretty much securing this area, I'm bringing in reinforcements, we are not doing that well on the left flank. Big Think was able to kill off a lot of forces from Jack here. And as you can see, we really have nothing left. There's a couple of helos coming in, and the last thing that we saw was a couple of Spetsnaz over here. So it's going to be quite difficult to get in here and stay safe. Now at this point I was not at voice communications with Jack, we were just using the standard text chat to coordinate attacks and trying to help each other out as much as possible. There goes another Griffin. Now we're going to be looking at this flank every once in a while because some really interesting things are going to be happening here. In the meanwhile, I'm deciding to, or I have decided rather, to try out this GAU-19 on the Griffin. For some reason, it seems to be in position, it seems to be locking on, but it doesn't do any damage. It's there. You can see it aiming, you can see it hasn't fired a single round, and for some reason, this thing, I don't know if it's malfunctioning or something, but it just doesn't want to fire. Fortunately, I have been able to capture these buildings with the Canadian Airborne. One of my Vickers Mark 7s is up here. The other one I relocated to back there. So I can also cover assaults coming in from this lane. The Starstreak team over here, pretty decent against helicopters. Airplanes, of course, not that much, only 2450. And another Canadian Airborne group is getting ready to join up in this position. Whereas the Kodiaks are taking position slightly further back, so that if the enemy decides to cross this open stretch of terrain, they're going to be railed down on by Bushmaster fire, which in their case is very destructive. Very accurate, they carry a good number of rounds. These guys can keep up their firepower for 4 minutes sustained, and as such, or well, let's be more generous, 3 minutes and a half. And as such can really deal with enemy infantry quickly, if they can stay at range. Because if they get too close, that 6 frontal armor is going to go pretty quick. You're not really going to be doing too much survivability there. Anyway, I had a feeling that this Vickers was gaining a bit too much into the heat of battle. So that's when you pop your smoke, and it even has a secondary smoke charge. And as this Vickers is pulling back from a Conqueror's group that came in way too close for comfort, of course, yes, it still has the APS, it still has 5 out of 6 trophy charges, so it'll probably be alright. But that's when the Canadian Airborne take this group out. Now, Jack's position on the left, we're pretty much trying to make do with what we have, and the fact that these guys are getting spotted is not very promising. This is the spotter, a KA-52 Recon Helo. Now the LAV-AD is a very mobile, I suppose you could call it mostly air defense platform. I believe that's what the AD stands for. Very fast, and most, I believe that the US doesn't have a unit like this in the standard deck. Maybe the Avenger comes closest, but that barely carries any armor. It does carry the Stingers, of course, but this one also has the GAU-12U, which against helos is quite accurate. Nice rate of fire. It can sustain fire for a little over a minute, and with that you can pretty quickly chew through a helo, unless it's one of those helos that has an ATGM which exceeds 2800 meter range. Now then, down in the middle, we have US Marines in contact with Spetsnaz. We really do not want these guys to come too close. And so far, both of the heavy tags seem to be working out, especially with the Marines in the building. They are quickly chewing through the Spetsnaz. Also another group over here. Now they made it into the building, and now they can start using that RPO. Which, if they get a chance to use that, is gonna... well, still pretty quickly chew through these US Marines, as you can tell. There used to be 30 guys here not too long ago. Whereas right now, the Marines are dying far faster than the Spetsnaz are. I'm also sending some units to the left here. I thought of setting up a defensive position all the way back here, so we get a couple of Highlanders. Again, the Highlanders, slight change. They're now a heavy tank unit, and as such, they take less damage. Also, the Eric's 2, still 1000 meter range, very accurate AP. However, as opposed to the Eric's group that I showed you earlier, the one that died out over there, these do not have an HE value, so they cannot engage on their infantry forces. Now Jack's making an effort here to try and just scout out what's going on here. Unfortunately, we weren't quite able to push here yet. We're going to be looking into that terrain later. LAV TUA-2B. Interesting unit, this one. I really like it. It's a 60-point LAV. Very mobile, as you can expect from that whole platform. Top attack missiles, which are guided, but they do a lot of damage. I found these things to be rather effective. If only they were fire and forget, they would be completely ideal for taking out enemy tanks. And of course, I believe the Canadians don't get too many fire and forget weapons, at least for HGMs. The French do. Check out the French replay or the French armor review that I did. But most of these things can still punch pretty far or pretty high above their own weight class. Again, deploying some other forces. This was mostly in response to the helos that were operating here. Unfortunately, as I arrived, no helos are left in sight. Spreading out my units. Another Kodiak here. I really like these units. The combination of armor, speed, autocannon fire, and the APS make this thing such a diverse unit. The one thing is that they are not amphibious, but well, I can live with that. Meanwhile, on the right flank, we're still doing a little bit of skirmishing every now and then. You can see that these Canadian airborne units have taken quite a bit of damage. And I'm seeing quad stacks of infantry come down this way. They're still moonwalking because the game hasn't quite gotten a good spotting on them yet. But for the Modostrelki, against these guys, which, well, despite the fact that they're entrenched and heavy, are outnumbered about 4 to 1, will make this quite difficult for these guys to survive. Fortunately, a Super Hornet comes in. This one carries a couple of, I believe, 500 kilograms. Yeah, 6 500 kilogram bombs. Lands pretty much on top of the Modostrelki. I get some kills there, and I believe the jet even makes it out alive, as the Red 4AA over this area wasn't too good just yet. And now, this is when the Modostrelki really do not want to be pushing. Cycling through my infantry here, the weakest squad, or weaker squad, goes back. New 10-man squad comes to the front. And now I'm really ready to invite these Modostrelki to come close and try and see if they can take out the Canadian airborne up close. Large puffs of smoke screens coming up. Decided to bring in a Kodiak, one of these things that was still waiting back there, because this is when those autocannons really shine. If there's not a smoke screen, that is. I wonder if that would be another interesting unit, by the way, for the mod. Something that has optics, infrared optics to be exact. So something that could look through smoke screens. What are you guys' opinion on that? Would that be something that you'd enjoy in Wargame? A specific, let's say, spotter unit, or maybe a very expensive infantry IFV, infantry fighting vehicle, that has, let's say, thermal sights, so they can still use their autocannon. Let me know what you think about that, and maybe Spectre can have a look at that. Anyway, I'm still taking some heavy artillery bombardment here. I guess they're out of smoke charges and they switched to HE. Canadian airborne not really taking kindly to that, and so far they are alive, but, well, they've been heavily reduced in number, let's say. And another shell lands, unfortunately for them, not at the structure where I am in. And this is when the Modostrelki finally reached my position, but just a little bit too late. So far, I'm alive, but I'm gonna definitely need resupplies for this position, as it's not really that strong. There goes Starstreak, killing off a helo with just one missile. Actually, 2, considering we fired 2. And right now, once again, position seems to be secure, but I'm, just to be certain, making or moving up a couple of new infantry units, as well as one of those Vickers. This is the one that took an HGM earlier. And we have an HLVW resupplying these positions and making sure that this frontal or this front line stays secure. Now then, back to the left. We're still building up a troop group over here on the left as well as in the middle to try and keep the enemy at bay. And potentially then later on push into Alpha and try to recapture these structures down here. In the meanwhile, down in the middle we still have some skirmishes. The Marines unfortunately did not survive for too much longer after I stopped covering them. Or at least I don't believe they did. A couple of cluster munitions come in right on top of the M1A2. This is not the most expensive tank, I believe. As the most expensive tank for the US at least used to be the 170 point tank. So the Abrams at least is not hanging around here waiting for lots of cluster munitions to rain down on its roof. So far, right next to a Hammett, and it's going to need a bit of repairs. Now then, another artillery salvo lands on my positions. Of course, right as this group was getting healed up, they're once again taking heavy artillery fire. But so far, they're alive, and, well, they're pretty expensive. I want these guys to survive, because as opposed to the Motostrelki that you saw coming my way, which are 7 points, these guys are 20 points. They're 3 times as expensive. That's why I want to keep them alive. It's a destruction match after all, so I gotta make sure that we keep these guys. In the meanwhile, I've moved up a little bit. Canadian Airbornes, Kodiaks, Vickers, and between these groups, I'm hoping to start slowly pushing through this forest. Right now, I don't quite have the troop composition that I want yet. And the interesting thing is, the first thing I run into is Spetsnaz. Which I thought, well, that's pretty easy. Because the Spetsnaz, with their RPO, well, they're going to do a little bit of damage. But a Kodiak has 6 frontal armor. So these things can fire that RPO all day. And the Kodiak at the end of the day would probably still be there. So just providing a bit of suppressive fire support. Another Kodiak moves up trying to get these guys out of the way ASAP. Because they're 30-point units. This is quite the investment. Unfortunately, that's when the BTR-90s start to show up. And while these things are not that heavily armored, or at least not as heavy as you can see on the Kodiak, they do have an autocannon that at short range becomes especially deadly. And all of a sudden my Kodiaks die, and while I was moving up the Canadian Airborne, I think, well, yeah, let's not try that. Not against that many groups of Spetsnaz. And we've seen what happens with Spetsnaz versus Marines. So I'm really not that eager to try Spetsnaz versus Canadian Airborne. Airstrike comes in, again makes it out, does take a hit. Unfortunately my bombs miss everything, or at least nothing gets destroyed. But I'm hoping that I at least panicked something, and that I'm moving in to, or I'm trying to move in with the Canadian Airborne to just finish off whatever's left. Which happens to be a heavily panicked BTR-90. Canadian Airborne take one shot, finish off the BTR-90, and that's when the Spetsnaz come in. Immediately retreating the Canadian Airborne, just look at the losses they took. Immediately 4 guys died. Put up a smokescreen in front of the Canadian Airborne. This is something that I really like about these Vickers. It's not such a defensive smokescreen. I mean, you can use it as such, but you don't have to. And you can also use it as a defensive smokescreen for your friendlies. So either your own units or other units which are at risk of getting killed off. And if the Spetsnaz with their RPO cannot do much against the Kodiak, then they sure as hell cannot do anything against the Vickers Mark 7. And this is again when the mobility of this tank, 80 kph, through a tree, or through a, yeah, just one tree. This is what we call a forest. Through a forest actually makes pretty good headway. Fortunately, it is so fast that it does not get hit by that airstrike. Not even panicked or anything like that. Sure, it's been a bit worried, but that's mostly down to, I believe, the hit that they took from the Spetsnaz. Other than that, not so much. What I'm getting a bit worried about is their fuel supply. Because they're down to 279 points of fuel and they're dropping fast. So I want these guys to survive. This is not the most expensive tank, it's a 95 point unit. But still, I would prefer to bring it back and just resupply it. In the meanwhile, on the left flank, there are a lot of infantry units ready to go. Again, I'm in contact with Jack over here to try and coordinate what we need here and how much of that stuff we need. I'm also doing a bit of shelling here with an M109 L52. This is one of those new ANS units. It has the very accurate RH L52 mortar, sorry, howitzer. It also has a bit of armor, which came in very useful. And it has 3-round burst. That's, I believe, a feature that I don't use this entire gameplay, but it's a nice feature to have if you want to quickly make short work of a lightly armored target. Also bring in a quad stack of mortars. Very cheap units as well. 18 points. Now shifted to the vehicle tab. And I want to use these guys. Here's my second howitzer, by the way. We're softening up this position. That's all those craters that you see. We're softening up the position with the howitzers and providing a bit of mortar / smokescreen support so that all of these American units can move up, with potentially flanking support from the Kodiak and the TH-495, which I believe hasn't been changed that much. The thing got a bit more armor. The autocannon I think is quite still the same, but it does come with the trophy, which would allow it to knock out enemy HGMs. On the right flank, I'm moving up again. I just lost actually two Canadian airborne units and a Kodiak. I thought there was just a bit of Spatsnaz in here, but I was wrong about that. And while the Spatsnaz do get their asses handed to them by the Kodiak, 40 VDV, or near enough 40 VDV, show up and just eliminate the Kodiak in one shot. And that is not something that I'm too interested in engaging at short range. Fortunately, the Spatsnaz were still on the move, unable to use their RPO, but I'm immediately withdrawing all my forces here. The Canadian Airbornes, the Kodiak, the Vickers has been refueled by the cargo there. And I'm really not interested in engaging 40 VDV at short range. Also, slightly further to the east I have 147, just to secure flanks. Bringing in a couple of new helos. These are going to be bringing in, I believe, the JTF-2, so the special forces. And there goes the other Kodiak. So we know where they are. But it's going to be quite difficult to get rid of all of these guys quickly. Fortunately though, these VDV do not come with the heavy tag. But the heavy tag is not going to be enough to save these Canadian airborne units. There's just way too many of these VDV firing back at them. So in order to help out here, again, a couple of Leopard C2 A-maps. Just your standard Leopard 2, well, Leopard C2. So technically a Leopard 1, which has been heavily up-armored. L3 or L7A3, very accurate, 65%, 55% on the move. It is off-road, not as fast as the Vickers tank, but with, again, the smoke discharger and the APS, as well as quite a lot of frontal armor. These things can take a hit, keep moving, support the infantry in the tree line. That's the plan for these units. Now, in the meanwhile, on the left flank, I'm putting up a lot of smoke. This is provided kindly by the M125s as well as the howitzers. Those are the longer range shells. We're trying to put up as much smoke as possible here so that the most amount of US forces has a chance to move up. We're seeing US Marines, we're seeing Rangers, again with the heavy tag. This is a heavy infantry reconnaissance squad. M2A3 Bradley backing them up with both a top attacking TOW 2B, the same as the one that you saw on the LAV I just showed you before. A couple of Humvees are rushing in to support, and the Marines, apparently undaunted by the napalm, running right into the fire and trying to get close enough to just uproot the Spetsnaz GRU and take over that structure. And look at that, these guys have the heavy tag running right through a napalm screen or a napalm wall. Sure, they've taken some losses, but they're not panicked at all, which I think is a remarkable performance on the part of the Marines here. Morskaya Pekota Heavy, again a heavy infantry group, but these guys also come with a heavy machine gun. That's the Cord 6 PSO2. These things put up a lot of HE damage, and it's more than the M240 is throwing back at them. Fortunately, the Spetsnaz GRU go down. It's actually my kill. I didn't really deserve that, because Jack did most of the work. A couple of Vickers, as well as TH-495 doing most of the fire support and trying to get some of the infantry units from over here uprooted. And again, ATGMs fly in, fast ATGMs at that, coming in courtesy of the K-52, and I believe an infantry ATGM squad down there. So far, most of them have been countered by the APS, but I'm rapidly running out of charges. We also know that there is, I believe, a T-14 Armata roaming around here, or what was it, a black tiger, black panther? Anyway, a black creature of a tank rushing around here. So I'm trying to smoke it, make sure it doesn't get any line of sight on all of our heavies, especially that M1A2, which has taken a hell of a beating. And in the meanwhile, Jack has been able to take over this structure. Marines sure have taken a lot of losses, but so far they're alive. The TH-495 unfortunately runs out of APS and gets hit by, I believe, the Chrysanthema from the Mi-24 VM. And at the moment we seem to have made at least some headway, but this is when the cluster munitions start raining down. Of course, the infantry is still not really impressed with it. They're going to be slightly annoyed with it, but that's about it. As far as I know, they don't take any damage from them. Vickers, again, at a long range, trying to provide some support against the Morskayas. Flight of the Valkyries comes in, 4 Black Hawks, yeah, there it is, Black Eagle. Black Eagle's 145 point tank, 24 AP, 23 frontal armor, very fast. Comes with an APS and smoke. That's the one I was trying to smoke up, just to deny him vision. And especially against the Vickers, I'm not too confident about my Vickers' chances of survival. Right flank, once again, being engaged by a lot of VDV. Attack markers on their positions, because now I have a couple of units which can help me out. I have another 4 mortars, which are going to prove to be quite vital to keeping the infantry on my team alive, and their team, not so much. The mortars themselves don't do that much damage to, or don't actually get that many kills on the VDV. They don't get credited with kills, but without the mortar support, the JTF-2 would have died out a long time ago. At this point, most of the VDV have either taken a lot of damage, maybe they're shut down by panic. There we go. Still 46 of them left. A couple of helos come in, JTF-2's taking over the forest, Leopards are ready for fire support, Canadian heavies over here, the Vickers. These guys have strayed too far, and they're now taking a lot of very, very spot-on mortar fire. And at this point, it's just easy pickings. They're stunned, they're probably considering routing, and out of that original 80 VDV, we have 1 survivor. And that's not going to be a situation that's around for too much longer. There we go, that's all the VDV dead. Interestingly, these 147s get to hang around here without being attacked. So I'm thinking, well, maybe their AA isn't that good. And that's when another 4 stack of units comes in. Not exactly sure what we're looking at, because it might look like an MTLB, but it doesn't have to be an MTLB, it could still be something else. And of course I'm also dividing my attention between my own flank over there and the left flank over here. I'm trying to help out with the units that I have, especially against this Mi-24 VM. The Chrysanthema is something that has to get killed off very quickly. The ADATS is something that can help me do that. 3,325 meter range against helos, 4.3 kilometer range against aircraft, lots of AP as well, in case you want to attack a ground target, and against helos and other aircraft, 7 HE. So yeah, against an Mi-24 it will probably need 2 missiles, but at least it outranges that Chrysanthema missile by about 500 meters, allowing it to easily take it out without being at risk. There's one hit on the Mi-24 VM, second hit, and of course with the VM having armor, it survives for a 3rd hit, and that's when we finally kill it. Now, another artillery salvo comes in, another group of Starstreak units gets killed off. Actually, do these things do damage against infantry now, or was that just a combination of cluster and standard HERT? Not sure. Back to my flank. We're slowly making progress, and yes, these are MTLBVs, which again have not been adjusted that much. Maybe a little bit more armor, but it's mostly the transports that I'm assuming the VDV came in through. And this is when the Leopards, combined with the JTF-2, are going to be making quite the force. Because if I encounter Spetsnaz, I push forward with the Leopards. If I'm encountering enemy infantry, or sorry, enemy vehicles, I'm pushing forward with the JTF2 and potentially just the Leopard again, because the Leopard can survive. It has that 16 frontal armor. The only thing I'm really concerned with is an APS, or sorry, an autocannon coming too close to the side of this thing, and then getting a kill. Because the side armor is 10 points, which at close range could be penetrated. And even if it does get penetrated, this thing has 20 points of strength. So hopefully I'm not going to have to worry about that too much. And of course there is another whole line of reinforcements coming in. Coyotes, Kodiaks with infantry, another couple of Leopards. This is the MMEV, by the way. Don't mind the unit's look, that's not too impressive. The amount of weapons that it carries is impressive. This is another very fast motorized AA unit. It's pretty much a smaller version of the ADATs that I showed you before. It only carries 4 of those missiles, which have pretty much the same specs. And it has the Iris SL, which is a long-range missile against airplanes. It's fire and forget, as opposed to the guided ADATs. And, of course, being a very, very fast vehicle, you can fire a couple of AA missiles and scoot. You don't have to stick around. And surprise, surprise, another group of 40 VDV shows up. Fortunately, they're not too close to the tanks, and with, again, the mortar support coming in from back here, I'm very quickly able to decimate these squads. And then JTF has a pretty easy time taking out whatever survivors are just straggling back, trying to make it into cover. I really like the JTF2 combination with the Leopard C2. It worked really well for me. Until I run into a quad stack of BMD2s, as well as a couple of SBA 60k bullets, but these guys are not armed. These things are. And the JTF really didn't like that. Just a quad stack of these are going to chew through the JTF very, very quickly. And at 22 points, they are almost as expensive as the Canadian Airborne. Again, I'll be going over a detailed review of these guys later. JTF, as opposed to the Canadian Airborne, is an elite squad, which makes them more survivable, less panicky, and more accurate. A pretty general bombardment here with the mortars, trying to get the BMDs killed, or at least suppressed. And that's when the Leopards should have an easier time trying to pick them off. And I'm assuming that, again, these are some of the transports that brought in the VDVs. But unlike my attempted maneuvers with combined arms, so tanks and infantry, they're only using the infantry and then holding the transports back. Whereas if you'd have the VDV backed up with the BMD2s, my infantry would not have been doing a good job, or at least not been as effective as they are now. Leopard moves forward, but unfortunately is unable to find the BMD2s. Now, the BMD2s are pretty mobile transports, so there's a good chance that they've backed up a little bit, and there they are, not really taking that much damage. A BMP2 does show up as well. Quite a lot of frontal armor still, 15 points. The Leopard takes a massive amount of damage from this thing, because as I expected, the amount of autocannon fire that this thing can take up close is not as good as I was hoping, especially not against 6 BMD2s. So the Leopard is trying to get the hell out of there, routing as quickly as possible. The JTF just running interference, hoping that I can sacrifice a 20-point unit in order to save a 60-point or 55.1. Seems to be working out so far. The other Leopard is trying to rush in to help. And we have a couple of additional forces, Coyotes, Leopards, as well as a Kodiak with more Canadian Airborne to try and rush in and save the day. Because if these guys can keep the BMDs at range, they will win. Same goes for the BTR-90, they can one-shot them. The closer you get, the more damage you do. And there goes another BMD-2. Still, these things have taken some damage. And again, another Spetsnaz group shows up. Spetsnaz, once again, not a threat to this infantry, sorry, to this tank. The transport, much more so. So the transport gets his first shot, and then I try and deal with the Spetsnaz. They're really not that impressive. At least, not against a tank. Kodiak comes in with the Canadian Airborne, quickly rushing through, trying to surprise these BMDs from the flank, as the BMDs are trying to deal with the Leopards and doing pretty good damage to both of them. The infantry with another Leopard comes in from the flank, gets side shots and everything, and manages to take out quite a few of these transports. Spreading political correctness all over the place. Now at this point most of these units have taken at least some damage, especially these Leopards, these frontliners. They've taken a lot of damage, so the HLVW rushes in trying to assist these guys. Interesting, we run over, well, pretty much literally run over a couple of Iglas here. Aircraft bombardment misses my units mostly, but I think the Leopard here took a bit of a beating from that last bomb. Gets panicked, but otherwise alright. And I was really quite happy that they were not able to get the logistics truck here. Another bit of artillery tries to hit the last known position for the Leopards, and that's why I keep these things on the move. I do not want to be a predictable target here. Unfortunately, they were able to get my Coyote, and they took out one of the Leopards. I'm not really sure, but I think it was one of the weaker frontline Leopards. At this point, the scores are in our favor. Initially, Red 4 was pretty damn even with us, but we're starting to get away from them points-wise. And as you can see, there's still quite a lot of time left in this replay. Or rather, down here, 16 minutes left. Canadian Airborne encounter another 37 Motostrelki. They're pretty much firing at point-blank range between these two groups. Another attack marker to make sure I know where they are. And the mortars, I believe, are relocating at this point, so they're not quite able to provide support. The Leopards are. And the Motostrelki, just being regular troops, are quick to panic, quick to get stunned. And while they do have a pretty dangerous anti-tank weapon, they are most of the time not quite able to fire it, but when they do, they immediately take out a Leopard. So I'm just trying to withdraw most of these units at the moment, hoping for the JTF-2 to assist, as well as a whole bunch of additional forces. Now don't mind the fire support tag that you see here. These are Highlanders. So they're not so much fire support, which is normally the icon that you see there, as they are, I'd say, light infantry. Again, Flight of the Valkyries, this time on my part with a couple of 147s. Unfortunately, as opposed to the previous attempt at helicopter fire support, this time around Red 4 does have a lot of AA around, judging or ranging from Mi-28s to medium to large caliber AA guns. It could have been a Tunguska. And there go all the 147s. Time to resupply most of these units. And unfortunately I do not have a lot of AA with me. What I do have is the occasional machine gun, as well as an autocannon here and there. And while they are doing some damage, it's really not going down fast enough. It was really interesting to see a lot of these Mi-28s down here in the tree line. They're able to take out quite a few of my tanks. But an Mi-28, or a combat helicopter in general, I'd say has more use, especially the Mi-28 with all of those HGMs. Has more use in an open area, because in a tree line situation such as the one right here, you just don't have enough line of sight, and that's when those HGMs simply don't come into power. They don't have the same amount of potency that they would have if I was attacking across this field and the helos were positioned there. They would be picking off every target that I have. Over here, they have to rely on their own spotting, and the attacker, their HGM, isn't even fire and forget. So the moment that they lose line of sight on the target, which again is very likely to happen, they will just miss that missile. And I get to live another day. Highlanders, again trying to withdraw, and note how many of my units have that heavy tag. The Highlanders, the JTF, the Canadian Airborne, all of these guys are heavy infantry squads. Now this was not so much by design, but it served me really, really well. And finally, of course mostly after most of those enemy helicopters have died, now I decide to bring in a couple more of those Starstreak teams that you see back there. A lot of the infantry as well as the vehicles that I have over here have taken a lot of damage. Not so much the new Leopards, which have just arrived, but it takes them a lot of fuel to get here. And of course, another bunch of Motorstrelki come in. And again, very dangerous with that RPG-28. So far, I think this Leopard's taken one hit, and I do not really want to risk another, so that's when you pop smoke, trying to get this thing back and fixed. And even a 55-point tank in a situation like this can be quite valuable, because it just takes a lot of time to reinforce the line, in the sense that bringing in a new unit is going to take you quite a long time, especially on this map. You're going to have to drive all the way from here, across this road, through here, and then it depends on where you want to head off. I usually take a crossroads right here, and then go through the forest. So it's going to take another, I'd say 3 minutes, potentially, before they finally make it to the front line. Left flank, quickly, hasn't changed that much. It's been reinforced. Jack has a good grasp of the situation over here. And interestingly, I believe at this point he was able to take out a command vehicle with a blind fire. He had a pretty good guesstimate on where the enemy CV was, and was able to take it out. And I think that both the CVs from Alpha and Bravo are trying to head back to Charlie, or maybe have headed back to Charlie by now. And they are pretty quickly recapturing Charlie, of course, as you would need to. But this means that they are missing out on quite a bit of unit income from Bravo and Alpha. And as such, we're able to reinforce our positions, secure flanks, reinforce units as they need to, especially logistically. And the enemy is just not able to field that many units anymore. Now back here I still have quite a few units that I just haven't used. The Pathfinders, the LEV, I have a Leopard C2, I even have a Leopard 2A6, which I believe in the new version of the mods, that's 2.41, I think, has been changed a lot. Or at least has been changed. 23 frontal armor, very accurate gun. AP at 22 leaves a little bit to be desired, but it's a nice and fast platform, a pretty good all-rounder, with an APS and smoke dischargers. And I sent it down here when we were pushing here, but I just completely forgot about it as I was moving so many units through here, micromanaging units, trying to keep them alive, trying to push them forward, cycle them back because they were taking too much damage, and so forth. Another couple of 147s touched down here, bringing in yet more of the JTF. At this point though, I'd say the forest is pretty much secure. You could argue that it is not that much of a strategic position though. I may have overinvested in a position that really doesn't give you that many strategic benefits. And of course the enemy doesn't really need to be here. So while it's nice to have this entire blob of blue units here, it's not that effective of an investment of all of my units. Now note how far that Darkhawk came. Darkhawk is a stealthy version of the Blackhawk, and even as it's dying it's almost managing to make it into their command zone. Jack is marking units for enemy artillery, and we still have the own artillery which is getting ready to fire, as well as my mortars, but they don't have the range to get there. And we're just trying to get a few more units onto the flanks with these helos. These were the my secondary flight of the Valkyries here. Not enough to bring them home, of course, as these are the only real two survivors. Left flank then. There's the Vickers, there's the mortars, the ADATs, and other than that, it's pretty really quiet down here, as Jack seems to be focused a little bit more on reinforcing. He's building up, I believe, a push down on this end, and getting the units ready to go there. And really at this point, Red 4 wasn't putting up that much of a fight anymore. Probably also due to the fact that they lost these two command zones. Lost, by the way, yeah, they haven't recaptured them. So I'm not exactly sure what was going on. I'd say try to resecure Bravo ASAP, especially because it's a 4-point zone. But now, yeah, there we go. Now Jack is bringing in a couple more units, which are going to be pushing across Bravo. And as the end of the battle is getting a bit more quiet, Going to be speeding this up a little bit because it's just not that interesting to watch. Again, reinforcing this position. More AA, a couple of Kodiaks, and a couple of Grizzlies. There's more recon units because all of these units are not recon. It's just medium recon all over the place. But the Grizzlies carry, I'm not sure if I still have one deployed, don't think so, Pathfinders, which of course have very good optics. There we are. Pathfinders, very good optics, very good stealth and elite training. We're taking a bit of a skirmishing here. 147 gets hit by a K-52. 188 Hornet flies in, tries to get the 150 or the 52, manages to get a hit on it, but this thing just limps home, down to 2 hit points. This is when Jack starts pushing. Rangers maneuvering. I know that I'm firing on this position with, I'm not sure if it's howitzers or mortars. Trying to do as much damage as possible here anyway. This might have been a glide bomb, considering how slowly that thing came in. But it was very, very quickly dealing with the BMD-2s before they got a couple of shots off on his infantry here. And the strikers are very fast, but unfortunately do not carry the APS. So it's going to be crucial to get these Conqueror groups ASAP before they are able to damage the strikers and potentially go after the Abrams, which I'm not sure has an APS. It might. There goes the Conquerors group. Spetsnaz VMF by Eltrill. Need to get these guys as quickly as possible again. Looks like they're not firing back. Weapons disabled. They can just sit back and get their asses handed to them. And I believe that at this point, I'm not sure if these guys surrendered. I don't think so. We're pushing up with most of the units here. There's a couple of Leopard Canadians, or 2A6s. Of course, one of them immediately gets clustered. The other one rushes forward, tries to do as much damage. Another Vickers. Could have been the original Vickers, by the way. One of the ones that was back there. I really, really enjoy using these tanks. Very nice, very mobile, very multi-role. And that's when we find a command unit, the Volk GU. Again, the Darkhawk rushes forward. Big Thing surrenders, as we have their, well, yeah, it's still there. There's the Volk, so they still have command over the zone, but really it's just GG at this point. I'm not sure who gets the, yeah, the Leopard gets the kill eventually. So, Canadians, I really like them. They are with their heavy tag on most of the infantry, of course, depending on how you set up the deck. Very, very potent. They do a lot of damage, or they have the potential to do so. Jack, scoring most of the points on this team, 4,500, losses 1,700. My losses were slightly less, but then again I did 1,000 points less damage. Quickly going through the kill-loss list. These were the Eric's teams that deployed initially. And while they weren't alive for very long, they were able to take out a couple of high-value targets. A BTR-90 with a Spetsnaz combo, ×2. I think they also took out a Bulat with the Igla, potentially inside. Canadian Airborne, early on in the engagement, getting rushed through that frontal line, trying to reinforce the Erics. Also dealing with a couple of these infantry units. That's when the Kodiaks started to arrive. Of course, dropping off the Canadians. And doing some damage to the transports. FA-35 Canadian. I killed the K-92. Ah, right. The F-35A Canadian is the F-35, of course, as you know it. It's the Canadian version of that fighter. I sent it over to the left flank, where it was able to deal with the Ka-92, as well as now my 24 VM, but that's when it got shot down. Unfortunately, very, very early on in the battle, and I believe it's the only one I have in the deck. Kodiak, Canadian Airborne. Here's the Vickers, one of them anyway. Mostrelki, a couple of Concours, VDV. And overall, I don't really have one top scoring unit for damage. It's not one of those legendary kill lists where you have one unit and it goes all the way down the list. Most of the damage that I did was spread out heavily between my units, trying to keep them alive, cycle them, reinforce. This was pretty much rinse and repeat. More Kodiaks, a couple of the Vickers here. JTF did a really good job here. Whole bunch of VDV. Of course, keep in mind that it's not like the JTF took out the VDV all by themselves. They were probably already softened up by the mortars that I was using. You can see some of them pop up every now and then. taking out the VDV, the Spetsnaz, the Modestrelki, but these guys really were instrumental in keeping the enemy suppressed, as well as Altriel using quad stacks of infantry. This is why I recommend against doing that. ADAT's taking out an SU-27 or 27S, and now we come across a Leopard which has really done a good job. This is Mr. Hayes. Quite a few transports, and I believe it was halfway towards, I'd say 2/3 into the battle, where I came across a couple of those BTR-90s which still had the Spetsnaz inside them. So they were able to kill off the BTR-90 and immediately kill off half the Spetsnaz team, and potentially kill off the rest just by main gun and machine gun fire. MMEV killing off a couple of aircraft, and again, yes, I'll be going into the specific Canadian units in a later video. And as you can see, most of these units, heavy tag. It really makes a hell of a difference, because what I was up against was infantry that did not have this. The VDV didn't have it, the Modestrelki didn't have it, the Spetsnaz did, but the Spetsnaz don't do damage against vehicles, or at least not as much. Now then, losses. There's the Canadian, or the F-35, lost to the Tor. A couple of units got killed off early by the KA-60. They were trying to get dropped off by the Griffin, and I think they were dropped off. Maybe as the Griffin crashed, the Airworks were able to get out and then get killed off consequently by the KA-60. And overall, you can see mostly that it's a mix of infantry and BTR-90s that do most of the damage. The occasional artillery unit, the Melka, the Smerch. There's one shot from the Black Eagle. That's my helicopter offensive, the second time I sent the 147s forward. Tunguska took out all three of them. Yeah, overall it's just mostly those units. And later on in the battle, when those Mi-28s popped up, they were able to get some kills. Pretty close to their own value, I think. 2 Leopards are 110 points. Canadian is 20 points, so that's 130. I think you could barely afford an Mi-28 for that. But that's the problem with using Mi-28s or HGM helicopters in close quarters. They're just not that good at it. Anyway, that's the Canadians. Hope you enjoyed the replay. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments, and you can find the deck down in the description. Keep in mind you need Ash and Shadows, and the deck might have already changed, or the units might have already changed with the newer mod version. I have another replay ready, and I'll be probably publishing that tomorrow, and then going to continue the Armory tour. Probably Thursday, as we have another video for Factorio coming Wednesday, with probably Transport Fever Friday, and then hopefully Saturday Battletech, which is something that I've also been looking forward to. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Good to be back making videos, and I'll see you soon for the next one.